Welcome to my first ever webinar. We've got a few more people to come, so we'll just give them a couple more minutes. But if you can hang fire a little bit, I'll be back with you shortly. In the meantime, I can introduce you to a little bit about the screen. You should notice on the left-hand side, you'll see a little question and answer thing. If you want to click on the question and answer little icon, it means that on the right hand side you can then type a question to me during the webinar and I'll be able to answer it. And if you want to be able to chat with other people in the room and just sort of say, hey, how are you going? There's also like a little chat icon, a little speech bubble. Click on that and it means you can just say hey. Anytime during it, doesn't interrupt anything, there's no giant flashings or kind of fireworks that happen. Cool, so we've got almost everybody, but yeah, have a little explore around the screen. I know that for a few of us this is our first foray into online webinar type things. Cool, so yep, have a little look and I shall be back with you shortly. I'm just making sure that everything's set up. Such a strange experience this. I'm quite excited actually. It's certainly a new sort of a new endeavour. If this works, it will be really, really cool. Okay, so we've not quite got everyone, but let's kind of carry on anyway because we're just past the starting time, and then hopefully, even though it's a Saturday afternoon, at least for those of us in England, we might get a few more popping along later. Cool, so welcome very much to this. This is, as I said, the first webinar that I've done, and I guess the reason I want to do this is there's very few spaces where we can come together, people across the globe, across the country, and really think about issues that are quite important to us. And an issue that's important to me is facilitating hearing voices groups. Why facilitating hearing voices groups? Why not kind of politics or ending world hunger? And I guess, as some of you guys know, I've always talked about how being part of a hearing voices group was really transformative to me in my journey. And certainly the last 12 or so years, I've either been taking part in groups as a member or facilitating them, or training other people to facilitate these kind of groups. So over the years I've kind of picked up lots of little hints and a real idea about what I think kind of helps groups kind of become safe and be this kind of ideal space for people to feel accepted, and what kind of gets in the way of that sometimes. So I've kind of come to the conclusion that there's no sort of identikit version of hearing voices group facilitation. You know, you can't just have a cardboard cutout. This is not about becoming a mini Rachel. Honestly, you don't want to do that. And it's not about becoming a mini Jackie Dillon or kind of Eleanor or Ron Coleman or Peter or the person that you kind of admire. It's about finding your own style. And that's very much what this is about. It's how do you get the balance right in all of this? I guess for those of you that just joined us, I was kind of explaining to people that if you want to ask a question at any point, please click on the little question-y kind of icon and the question and answer icon on the left-hand side. If you click on it, you'll see a little screen. You can type away and then I'll be able to see the questions that you're asking and know that other people are actually out there. And if you want to talk to other participants, then just click on the chat, the little speech bubble chat icon, and then you can write something and just say, I exist, do you exist? Kind of nice in this weird internet world. The other way of interacting today is polls, and I'm going to have a little go at that. I was kind of curious about who's coming on this little webinar, whether you've had experience of facilitating a hearing voices group, whether you've been to a group, or whether you're just interested. So I'm going to sort of ask you this little poll on the screen about whether you currently facilitate a group, whether you used to facilitate a group, whether you're hoping to facilitate a group in the future, whether you've been a member of a group but not a facilitator, or whether you're just kind of curious and interested. So if you should hopefully see your the kind of poll go up on the screen, if you could just click on the one that most applies to you, and then you should see what other people have kind of voted for at the moment. So at the moment we've got someone who's hoping to facilitate one in the future. I shall kind of leave that up there for a bit, so if you feel kind of like able to click on something and you're not on an iPad or an iPhone or something, that would be awesome. So on to the next bit, I guess. What is a Hearing Voices group? And this is just in case there's anyone here that hasn't facilitated or been in a group. I think Hearing Voices groups are, obviously they've been around since the late 80s. They're just this safe space where people with taboo experiences, and in our culture at least, in the English culture, can come share their experiences with others and feel kind of validated, heard and listened to. The kind of place where it's okay to talk about your voices, it's okay to talk about your visions, and a place of kind of mutual respect and empathy where you can support one another and feel part of a community. And in the world, which can be very intolerant, these communities are very precious. Cool. I can see some people have voted now, which is awesome. We've got lots of people who are very much hoping to facilitate groups in the future, which is a great place to start. So welcome, guys. So if Hearing Voices groups are this beautiful kind of equal environment where members are supporting each other on this equal basis, why do we need facilitators? You know, what is the role of a facilitator within this? Because it's not as simple as someone being there as the expert to teach others to cope with their voices, because that's almost the exact opposite of what this approach is all about. So yeah, do all groups need a facilitator? I think the answer to this is no, which sounds weird for a group facilitation session, but it's possible, I think, somewhere for there to be a group that doesn't need us as facilitators, where members can take care of one another, where tasks can be allocated and no one needs to kind of be the named facilitator in the room. But just because that's possible, and perhaps the ideal, that doesn't mean that it's an easy ideal or one that most groups feel comfortable with. I think if I jet back to when I first went to a Hearing Voices group, I was in a state, really. I was a long-term patient of the mental health system, diagnosed with schizophrenia. The only groups I'd ever been to had someone there to look after me. And if someone had said, hey, this is a group where you're kind of equal and there's not an expert, I would have been like, oh, that's pretty weird. But then if there also wasn't a named facilitator, I'm not sure I would have gone. I'd been so disempowered by my experiences, it was very hard for me to know, well, what's it kind of, yeah, what do I do with this freedom? And I hadn't had the practice of listening to other people and just taking part. So I needed someone to kind of show me how this could be done. And the group I was in at the time very much relied on its facilitator for quite a while. So I think often in the real world, facilitators have this awesome role. The challenge, and there's always a challenge, isn't there, is that if the facilitator has complete control of the group and the strongest voice and the biggest presence, that leaves no space for this equality in the group to kind of develop, which is why I'm doing this webinar on getting the balance right. As I've said, this is almost the most important trick as a facilitator. Cool. So think, how are we going to do this? I'm going to explore 4 different aspects of being a facilitator, and we're going to kind of look at the extremes of those aspects and try and find a balance between both of those 2 extremes. I think the 4 ones we're going to look at today is voice. And by voice, I don't mean the voices that I hear, I mean having a voice or an opinion within the group. As a facilitator, do we have a right to an opinion, or are we just there to support others to express themselves? How much of an opinion is it okay to have, given that we have a position of power within the group sometimes? We're also going to look at disclosure. How much of myself, my personal history, my story do I share? Do I share everything without any filters? Or do I share nothing and have this protective sort of barrier where I'm just separate from the group and the group don't get to know me? What about inputs? Like how much of my own ideas and suggestions and support do I offer in the group? Am I just a facilitator, hands off and letting the group support one another? Or am I super directive and fixing and trying to offer support, coping strategies, and input into people. What's that kind of work with? So there's the input, and finally emotions. I wasn't quite sure how to frame this, but I guess there's a sort of a dilemma between, do I sit with people's hopelessness and overwhelm and feelings of suicidalness and kind of just extreme distress and just accept those feelings? Or do I jump in and try and frame things positively? Do I have to feel like I need to leave the group on a high? You know, is that what being a facilitator is? Or is it just sitting with it and just sitting alongside people in their distress? So they're the four kind of elements we're going to look at for the moment. At the end, we're going to come to how actually making mistakes is kind of cool and kind of useful, and it can be turned into a positive, because I'm a strong believer that perfection is not the goal. The goal is just to be there. So I kind of look forward to sort of thinking about that. Cool. So first one, having a voice. I'm kind of interested. I don't know if you guys feel comfortable yet kind of using the chat facility, you know, that kind of speech bubble. But while I look at this kind of element, it'd be really cool if you share some of your ideas about how much of an opinion it's okay for facilitators to have. Is it fine for you to always have a very vocal opinion? Do you tend to like hold yours back a little bit and be very tentative with it? Or do you find this middle point that we're kind of looking for, I guess? It'd be good to hear your views. In terms of why do I think this is important, the idea of how much opinion or voice, how strong is my voice within the group? I think this comes down to power. As a facilitator, as the one that's technically at least invited people into the space of the group, it's natural for a group member to be looking to the facilitator for some kind of answer, some kind of guidance, almost a cue of what's acceptable in this space and what's really off limits. With that in mind, my opinion as a facilitator can be more powerful perhaps than I'd like it to be. I have kind of an interesting relationship with power. I'm not averse to it, but I'm also very cautious of how much I use of this power. So imagine a scenario. We've got a group, and the group are really interested in why people hear voices. They're kind of like trying to work it out, and there's a few different ideas in the group. There's someone who has a spiritual interpretation, someone who's got a very medicalized and a biological interpretation, someone with trauma, many people kind of undecided actually. And someone asked me the direct question, why do people hear voices? Do you think it's fine for me to go, should do a poll for this really, shouldn't I? But is it fine for me to go, I have an opinion, I know why I hear voices, or I think I do, or these are some of the ideas about it? Or am I meant to just purely be very neutral and go, well, actually, there's lots of different ideas. What do you guys think? I think for me, there is this balance between it's okay to have an opinion, but in stating it first and going, well, I think from my experiences, it's related to trauma. Whilst it's fine for me to have that opinion, for me to voice it first is almost to tell people, well, I'm a trauma perspective person and I might only be acceptable, I might only accept other people with that trauma perspective. So there's kind of a downside to that. But equally, if I always put it back to the group and go, so what do you guys think? What's the downside to that? Well, that could very much be that I'm going, I don't have an opinion, and I don't know if I could, as a group member, I don't know if I could trust someone that didn't ever have an opinion, because I'd never get to know them. There'd never be that connection. We'd never be able to disagree because there's nothing to disagree about. It could be quite disempowering to have a facilitator with no opinion. And obviously someone's actually managed to use the chat function, which is fantastic. Thank you, Joel. I think, yeah, like Joel says, it's kind of, everyone is entitled to their opinion, but balancing that power as well is incredibly difficult. For me, I guess where I have the balance is that I generally try and ask other people first and go, well, there's loads of ideas and I'm not sure I've got like dominion over the truth here. So what ideas, what do you think? The person asking the question, what do you have any ideas, or have you heard of anything? And then at some point I might go, well, for me personally, my stuff seems to be about the stuff I've gone through in my life. But I've also, and I always use it, but I've also met people who have spirits or telepathic abilities, and that's their understanding of their experiences. So it's kind of diverse. So I don't know, the way I find balance in that is by saying my opinion openly, but also by following it with some sort of moderating factors that show that actually there's no one answer to this. And sometimes to talk about how difficult it is for there to be no one answer. So yeah, in terms of voice, I think it's important to be honest about your own opinions. It's really good to be honest about your opinions, but also to be aware that your opinions, A, might not matter that much to group members, or B, might matter so much that actually they might squish their own. So it's that sense of awareness. And if you notice that your opinions seem to be guiding the group and everyone always agrees with you, I'm guessing that's kind of a good point to step back and go, hey, does everyone really always agree with me in life? Or have I just got this kind of vibe going in the group where people want to agree with me because they want to be part of this group that I'm nurturing? The next kind of element, I guess, of facilitating hearing voices groups for me is about disclosure. And I guess, yeah, I'll start off with asking you guys again to use the chat if you're able to, because I'm interested about what you guys think about disclosure and talking about your experiences within the group. And by disclosure, I don't mean just talking about your experiences of voices, visions, and stuff that kind of comes into the hearing voices group territory. What I'm talking about is the kind of the disclosure that anybody can make. So if you don't hear voices, it's absolutely brilliant if you can share something about your own experiences in life, your own struggles, your own challenges, but then there's that worry about, can I share too much, too little, am I distracting from the group, and all that kind of stuff. One of the challenges with this online stuff is that there's about a 40-second delay between me talking and people asking questions or making comments. So if you feel that I'm kind of ignoring some of your points at some point, try not to worry too much. I will definitely come back to them. It's so Google can kind of like process it so we don't lose signal. So yes, where are we? Getting all distracted with extra things popping up on the screen. Yeah, disclosure, how much do we share? And I guess we can go to two extremes again. You've got the share everything without any filter. So whether you're a voice hearer or not, sharing anything that pops into your head. If you've got a parking ticket, if you've suffered a personal issue like a loss, redundancy, if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you've not slept, if your cat puked on your shoes. Not sure where that example came from. Just sharing anything that you're going through. And on the other side of that, there's sharing nothing, having the veneer. Let's kind of look at some pros and cons. Okay, imagine that you shared everything, and you might think that, yay, sharing everything is very much the aim here, because we're talking about kind of being in the group, not stepping back from the group. So I guess the positives for sharing everything is that you are alongside people. You're not pretending to be elevated or distanced. You're showing that we all go through struggles, and you don't become the perfect expert in the room. But the downside, what are the downsides? I guess the downsides are probably the same as the upsides. You're in the room, which is great, but I don't know if you've ever shared something very personal that you feel overwhelmed by, and you find yourself kind of lost within it, and suddenly you're so in the room that you lose your perspective as a facilitator. You can't have the overview that a facilitator needs of how people are doing. And if the group isn't in a place where someone can step into that role of supporting the group as a whole, that role is empty for a time, and that can be quite anxiety provoking for the group. Also, I guess one of the things about being a facilitator is that it's kind of, you could get into this thing where I could be so overwhelmed as a facilitator and sharing my overwhelm that group members who take on caretaking roles within groups start to kind of worry about me and try and support me, which is great. But then not only worry about me, but that goes to such an extent that they no longer feel able to talk about their difficulties because my difficulties are so big. So that the group will say, oh, I'm fine, yeah, there's nothing to worry about. How are you? And then it becomes my support session and not a group support session. So there can be those things that kind of evolve. And it's really good kind of point by Jess as well, that the word hearing voices groups can kind of suggest that the only kind of experiences that are valid to talk about are hearing voices, which is a really narrow definition of people's experiences that they may want to bring to a group. So as a facilitator, whether you're a voice hearer or not, you might feel that your precise experience is off topic, that people may not accept it, that you might be excluded. And that's a really challenging one to deal with as well. I guess for me, the positive side of actually bringing in more than just hearing voices is that it, for me, in my opinion, I'm voicing it, I guess, is that hearing voices group is one that accepts people as they are. Some of those experiences may be voices, some may be parts, some may be visions or kind of tactile sensory experiences, or even the sense that you're being watched or that things aren't right, and that we can talk about those openly and not kind of have a hierarchy of what's okay, what's not okay. I also think one of the best groups I went to as a member was one where we talked about our kind of, just our lives. We're not just walking voice hearers or vision seers, we're human beings. So by sharing in the group, we're kind of modelling that it's okay to talk. But as I said before, the sharing everything without filter has some definite downsides. Let's switch to the kind of other side of this. Imagine we went into a group and we shared nothing of ourselves and our experiences, or only shared very historic examples that were completely neat, tied up, and like, yeah, I heard voices, but I never struggle with them now. When actually, maybe I do still, and I definitely do struggle with my voices still. I guess let's look at the pros of that. What's kind of useful about that. I guess one of the useful things about that is that kind of it's less complicated for the group, who are maybe used to people being more standoffish and professional and sorted and expert in the room. That might be a more comfortable role for the facilitator to be in for the group. It might be more comfortable for the facilitator because then we don't have those anxieties about, is what I'm saying okay? Is kind of, am I going to be accepted in this? Or am I stealing time from the group? Is the group becoming about me, not about the group members? Are people not going to take me seriously as a facilitator anymore? So if we're quite anxious, actually, it's maybe easier not to say anything. So they're the real kind of pros. And then underneath that, you've got the kind of cons. And I suppose the cons of saying nothing is that, well, you are separate from the group. You're not part of it. It ceases to be a peer support group of equals. Whether or not you're a voice hearer, I think we're still equal within that group and can support one another. It becomes this treatment, I guess, where you've got the person who's okay and the rest of us who, by definition, as members, have an issue of some kind or other, are not okay. And that feels really unhealthy for a group. And you miss the bonuses of some kind of disclosure, showing that it's okay to struggle sometimes and that it's okay to need support, that once you get to become a facilitator, it's not like you have to shut off from every kind of difficulty. It's about kind of a balance. And I guess for me, finding this balance is really challenging. And I think it's really important, as Jess has said, that actually, if we're going to put ourselves in a vulnerable position, there is not, if we're going to stay as a facilitator, it's like, how do we share and also deal with our feelings about sharing, but deal with the group's feelings about us sharing, and how on earth do we manage that? One of my important things, I think, as a facilitator is to have a co-facilitator. I find that really, really important. I do facilitate on my own sometimes, but I can really feel the missing of having someone there with me, because I think it's so important to be alongside. And it's kind of, yeah, it's so necessary to sometimes to have someone who can keep that overview of the group and help support people with their feelings without you having to multitask all of the time to think about. I think being the only facilitator kind of sets up this thing where you can't fully share because you have to kind of be on it all the time, and it's very hard to be part of the group if you're in that kind of position. And yeah, it's a challenge, definitely. um, I guess finding that balance so people can kind of share and feel that they're amongst equals, but also don't feel they need to take care of you, to feel that you're part of the group and not separate from the group, but not disclosing so much that the group is fully like Ray focused or you focused. I think there's different ways that I handle this, and it's got to be kind of a personal thing, whatever works for you. One of the things I do as a default, I guess, especially in groups like prison groups and young people's groups, when, in my estimation at least, people have got a lot going on, and I'm not fully a peer, I'm not a young person, I'm not in prison, so there is an element of distance there. I'm an adult and I'm in the community. Is that I tend to use sharing for a particular purpose. I tend to use it to build connections and not to show the same, because we're all different, but to show that it's okay to share, that I'll hear people, and yeah, that I'm not fitting into the box of what they maybe expect me to. I'm not this kind of facilitator therapist type person, that I'm just me. So yeah, it's sharing with a purpose. If we're talking about, say, if the topic of conversation is about voices and whether they tell the truth or not, then I'll often, if I don't want to share fully, I'll think about a time in my life where I've had to question whether the voices told the truth, or maybe when I've acted on voices, or when kind of I've been puzzling it out. And if it seems appropriate, I kind of might mention, well, I've had to think about this a little bit. Is it useful if I kind of share a little bit about that? And if people go yes, I'll be like, hey, so this is kind of what it was like for me. Does that resonate for anyone, or is it completely different? And yeah, that's sharing with a purpose. If someone comes into the group to be new, I'll often share that I have lived experience and that I've spent a long time going to these groups before kind of facilitating them, again as a point of connection. So that's kind of purposeful sharing, and for me the good thing about that is it means that I'm not putting myself in this position of extreme vulnerability, and it feels like I can still be a facilitator whilst being honest and real, not kind of manipulative, not kind of lying about my experiences, but I feel that there's a purpose for me to actually input them. But there is another kind of sharing, and I think it's kind of cool to do this, but it's also a challenge, and this is sharing openly. Sharing about the stuff I'm currently dealing with, the feelings I'm currently having. And I did this quite recently in a group where there's a bereavement within the group. And before the group, I was thinking, is it okay for me to say that I feel really upset about this and that I have struggled with it? Or do I have to kind of pretend to be okay because I don't want to make other people feel bad? And I kind of had to struggle with this a little bit. And the way I thought about it is actually I'm a part of the group. For me to pretend that I'm mostly okay and just say, oh, I'll deal with this separately, it's again putting a big block between me and the group. So what I tried to do is just go, yeah, actually I feel and felt really sad, and it's really strange being in this room at the moment. I'm finding this a bit, I wasn't sure how I was going to feel here, and it is weird. And a little bit of me struggling with that and asking how other people are feeling about that. And it enabled this discussion where it was okay to say that even being in this space was hard. And it felt kind of nice because it's this moment where we were supporting each other with the shared issue. And there was something kind of special about that, I think, something nice. And it was different for me because instead of sharing these past issues that I know aren't going to overwhelm me, it was certainly sharing a small bit of something that currently feels very raw and very painful. And I think that's maybe where the balance is. I need to be careful not to be so overwhelmed I can't facilitate, and people need to caretake for me. But it's okay to show vulnerability. I think each of us as facilitators will have a different line with that, and that's fine. I guess my rule of thumb is knowing why I'm sharing something. Am I sharing it because it feels like a safe group and this is something that, I don't know, that the group can kind of hold at the moment? Or am I sharing it because this is the only place that I have, and I need this group to be about me? If I do need this group to be about me and I'm a peer facilitator, I think one of the things I have done in the past is actually say to people, you know what, I'm having a really awful week. Can someone else step in as facilitator this week so I can actually use the group for support? Or I'll speak with my co-facilitator before and like let them know that that's what's going to happen. And be really open with the group that this week, for this week only, I'm just going to take part fully. Their kind of flexible roles can be kind of cool sometimes. So yeah, I mean, it's again fantastic people are using the chat function there. Thanks for all your kind of your thoughts on this. I think it's a really difficult area. It's one of those ones that I guess it would be really good to meet up in a room and think, well, what are our anxieties about sharing, and really explore those, because I think there's a lot about whether I want to share, whether the group want me to share. There's a giant things, and even better than that perhaps is to have in the group, bring it up as a topic of conversation and go, how do you guys see me as a facilitator? How do how do you see us if you're in a pair? Like, what do you expect from us? How does it work if we're having a bad day? What kind of issues might that bring up for you? What kind of stuff can we do to make sure that we're a group in this, and as facilitators we support one another and support you guys and you support us, and that we're together rather than separate, and just see where that goes? Because I guess often we spend a lot of time as facilitators talking amongst ourselves and working stuff out and forget to ask the group, which kind of gets out of balance really. I'm pretty sure many groups would feel really bad if they felt that you could never be open about stuff with them, but also why it can be difficult sometimes. So sort of moving on to the next part, input. How much can we actually offer to people? I guess on one side of this we've got completely hands off. I'm here to facilitate. I'm not here to offer my opinion. I'm not here to suggest things. I'm not here to throw coping strategies at you in the vain hope that one of them will stick. I'm not here to tell you how to deal with your voices, your visions, or to assume that I have any real understanding of what it is you're going through. I'm just here to facilitate the space. That's kind of a cool position in a way. It's almost the opposite of mainstream mental health services. It's this one which assumes that the person in the group members themselves, are kind of okay at sort of self-managing. It assumes that they have this level of being able to kind of support themselves, support each other, and that's really cool. But most facilitators that I know don't feel very satisfied with that, and actually many group members I know don't feel satisfied with that. They kind of, like, when I went to a group, I wanted the facilitator to tell me what to do, or at least wanted their opinion. And looking back, I guess their opinion mattered a great deal to me, and did actually help form who I became. So it's a powerful opinion, but it's one that I actually really, really wanted. So to be in a group that has a completely hands-off facilitator, that might have been really overwhelming. And certainly at the network, I've had a lot of we do this thing that people get in touch with us, we tell them where groups are and they choose whether to go or not. And occasionally I hear back from someone who goes to a group that I think have a great kind of peer vibe, real non-interventionalist, we're just here together. Whether they're facilitated by a voice here or not, they've just got that kind of open space feel to them. And I hear back from some people some of the time, and they say, that group was a waste of time. No one told me how to cope with my voices. I wanted something focused. I wanted someone to have an opinion about my stuff to help me. I didn't feel I got that. And I think that's a real shame, because this ideal of peer support is beautiful, but it can sometimes be implemented in such a way that people really miss. It's out of step with what people actually want. And So what do we do in response to that? Do we jump to the other side and actually intervene all of the time? And a very kind of, what would a group look like if it was interventionally? I guess ones I've seen are if the facilitator is the one that's almost holding court, that members speak and take turns, but kind of come back and sort of like it's kind of hub and spoke. You've got the facilitator as the hub and the members as the kind of spokes around the wheel, and the facilitator asks a question, member answers. Facilitator asks a question, member answers. The facilitator asks anyone else if they've experienced it, other member answers. Facilitator speaks, member answers. You know what I mean? This is kind of getting boring, isn't it? But I'm sure we've all seen groups like that where the facilitator is definitely the centre of the group. So, and they're the ones guiding it, trying to pick out the relevant points, but also going, well, how are you dealing with that? Have you ever tried? Blah, 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 blah. And I think that's kind of a difficult kind of group to be in. It's a difficult kind of group to kind of move around because the members never feel or rarely feel that they develop the expertise because the facilitator holds it. And I wonder why that kind of happens. And I think sometimes in discussions with other facilitators, it can come from a place of anxiety. This is especially true if you have professional background, because you might feel, I've done these years of therapy or psychology training, and someone's very distressed, and if we're in a one-to-one session, I'd offer something to them, sitting back and just hearing how bad things are. That feels like I'm being negligent. I've even had conversations with people who've said, it feels damaging, wrong, just to hear someone. I've got to offer it. I've got to, that pull to fix. I need to intervene to do something. The feeling's a really powerful one. But even as a voice hearer who's not a professional like me, sitting next to someone in distress does pull a lot of my wanting to fix, my caretaking parts. And it's really tempting just to offer people like this really, this, have you ever tried? What about this? What about that? And certainly, I don't know if you've ever heard yourself do this, but whenever I hear myself start to chuck coping strategies at someone, I need to kind of almost like step back and go, whoa, what happened there? Apologise. Say it feels like I'm chucking strategies. I'm not sure that's what I'm meant to be doing now, and it doesn't feel like it's very helpful. And then kind of like work out where we go from here, and kind of like both Jess and Jay, I think it's John, but I'm really bad with names, have said one of the most sort of fundamental questions you can have in the group, I guess, that can kind of mix this up a little bit, is to say, well, hey, what do you guys expect from me here? What do you want me to do? And I guess in an ideal world, they go, I just want you to listen. I want you to be respectful. I want space to speak. I want you to help us find space to speak. That'd be great. But imagine in a real world that you kind of find that people say, you know what? I kind of want you to be the expert. I want you to fix it. I want you to get rid of the voices. I want you to make it better. I want you to help me. What do you do then? And it'd be really good actually, because I know you've started to use the chat thing. If you could kind of add a few extra things. Yes, it is, John. Brilliant. What do you do if people want you to fix it? Do you have any ideas, any thoughts, any examples of things that have helped you kind of overcome that? That'd be fantastic. For me, I think kind of very much just expressing myself and going, I wish, if I feel that urge to fix, to kind of go, actually to say it. I like saying things and go, I feel that I just want to make things better right now. It seems like things are in a really bad place. I'm feeling this urge to just kind of like say something that will be the magic thing. And like, I feel really crap that I can't do that, but also I know that's not my role. I mean, how do you guys think about that? What do you guys want from the group when you're feeling overwhelmed? Cool. great, some questions are coming in. We'll come to the questions right at the end. So keep kind of adding them. For those of you that don't know the question bit, it feels like I'm on like some weird buy it now kind of telly, but I'll step back from that thought. There's no buying it now part to this. I'll definitely answer questions at the end, so keep just putting them in, and I'll keep an eye on them and make sure we definitely have a good amount of time to answer them. And we've got about 20 minutes left, so plenty of time to get to those. So yeah, I think for me, I tend towards, if you think of the balance, I tend towards the non-interventionalist, possibly more so than many other facilitators, and that's just my style. But I'm not at the extreme. I guess I figure in my journey, in my life, I've picked up some tips that are kind of useful, maybe, hopefully, and other people in the group picked up some tips that can kind of be useful. In fact, actually, as a group member, one of the best things about the group for me was that it helped me see how my lived experience could be useful for other people sometimes, at a place when I was so used to being the ill one in the room. So yeah, I guess I tend towards the let's just share and sit with kind of end of the spectrum, but I'm happy to kind of say, hey, I kind of resonate with that a little bit. I've kind of not experienced that, but something similar. And one thing that kind of helped me was blah, blah, blah. Is that something you've ever tried? You know, has anyone else been in that kind of position, and what sort of things have helped them? I try and stay away from, has anyone got any ideas for Bob? I don't know if you've been in a group where you've been Bob, you know, the person who's got the issue, and the facilitator goes, has anyone else got any ideas that could help Bob? And then that almost puts the group in this fixing position. So everyone's stopping listening to Bob and how Bob's feeling, and they're thinking about, well, what could Bob do? I need to help Bob. And so you get this flurry of ideas, and Bob might be getting frustrated. He might be sitting there going, thank you, but yeah, I'll try that. But you get the vibe that he probably won't. I think kind of trying to hold back from that kind of let's all be fixy as a group, not just you as a facilitator, is good. So to actually not go, can anyone make any suggestions for Bob, but to go, has anyone kind of gone through something similar and has maybe found something that's been useful, or can anyone empathise with that? That's kind of really good. And as Jess has said, and kind of Joel as well, the idea that the group have the expertise. It's not all about what we think and what we can offer. We're part of the group and have some stuff, but other people have some stuff too. And I guess the awesome part about being a facilitator is keeping hold of the knowledge that the group have a lot of expertise, even if they themselves don't believe it. It also stops us having the pressure of saying the right thing, because, I don't know, I think there's been I've facilitated for many years, but the times that I've actually said the right thing perfectly and had this moment of, yeah, I'm really glad I just said that, I think that's happened like once, maybe twice. The rest of it is slightly messy, and we're just like chatting, and I've got an idea of what might be useful, but I wouldn't claim to say it was the right thing at the right time. And yeah, I think very much as Jess says, the challenge with getting in the place where we're all offering stuff to Bob, to the person who's the ill one in the room or the overwhelmed one, is that we've forgot that Bob's been dealing with this for quite a long time, probably, or even if it's only recent, he's survived with it before coming to the group. So perhaps a better position for the group is actually thinking about what's helped Bob get here today, what's helped Bob kind of be able to exist despite the stuff that he's struggling with, and how has he managed to do that, and how do other people manage? I think that's the other thing that I found quite useful when we get into the dodgy coping fixie conversations that seem to be ultimately, in my experience at least, kind of unhelpful and can leave people feeling kind of like either patronised or de-skilled or a bit useless, is just, what's the word, is kind of not going, what can make this better, but going, when people are really in this difficult, scary, overwhelming place, how do they hold on? How do they kind of, almost like likening it to some sort of tsunami or storm where you're being battered from all sides, and it feels like even the idea that you can move is extremely dangerous because you might get swept away by this giant wave. How do you hold on, and what do you hold on to? And that's possibly one of the most coolest conversations I've had in a group, when people have been feeling very hopeless and I've had that need to sort of tell them what to do. Just sitting back and kind of recognizing that they're alive still, and just how is it that people can hold on. And then hopefully there's some people in the group that aren't feeling that hopeless who can talk a little bit about what they've held on to. And I think it's kind of, it can be very beautiful because it's this balance between, again, it's the balance word, balance between trying to make it better and go, yeah, but you know, it's all going to be okay. And just going, this sucks, this is hard. How can we withstand this, and how can we support you to withstand this? And I guess this kind of brings us to the next one. And I think for me, there's this idea about like, how can we withstand really overwhelming emotions within the group? And yeah, it's difficult because as a facilitator, I really don't want people to leave the group feeling worse than when they came in. I don't want, you know, this is my own personal stuff here, but I don't want people to kind of leave the group going, this group makes me feel crap every week. But then I also know that it's not my right or my responsibility to kind of try and shine everything to make it glitter and sparkle, when actually it's hard to deal with this stuff sometimes. And so I don't know if you felt that need to kind of to end on a positive. And I've often kind of wondered what that is. And I think it'd be good if you can wonder, if you experience that, what that might be as well for you. It'd probably be different to what it is for me. But for me, I think it's about recognizing how hard it is to exist sometimes, and really empathizing with that and seeing it in people, and almost like imagining what it was like for me in that place. But also just me loving the group and the space so much that I want people to feel that it's helpful to them. Do you get what my mistake is in all of this? It's very me, isn't it? It's okay, I can be me too, but it's a lot about as if I have the power to put things on the bright sides to make it good and to make people suddenly feel better. And as if we do a round of like, what are you looking forward to in the week? What's going well? Tell us one strength or one positive. If we do something like that, that I naively believe that this will have a lasting impact on people, when actually, I don't know, every group's different. So if you do this, it might work beautifully for your group. But if we enforce it on a group that's feeling quite hopeless, kind of what we're doing is saying, we can't hear your hopelessness. It's not acceptable here. And you need to make me feel reassured that I can make you feel better. How amazingly wonky is that? And yeah, I think that's certainly not something that I really want to play into. So if I find myself kind of going down that route, I try and take a big step back and almost go in the opposite. And rather than going, ooh, what's positive happened, is maybe go, how annoying is it when people do what I just did there? You know, try and make something positive when actually it's really hard. And we talk about how hopeless people feel, how annoying it is to have the cheery worker going, hey, it's all right, guys, or to have a friend who's always looks on the bright side, and how there's not any space for people just to be angry or afraid or confused. And a weird thing sometimes, not always, happens in this space. It's like people start to open up about how that's annoying, but then start to get to the point where they say how they're actually managing and what they're going to do. And it's like it starts to move. I kind of figure with these emotions, as long as a facilitator that I battle against people's emotions, it means that people can't actually, I don't know, get too stuck in proving how bad it is and fighting against me as a facilitator, that we're just not on the same page. And it only works if we can sit alongside each other and look at it and go, whoa, yeah, what I did there was a bit stupid. And then it starts to move. And I think It's a complex issue. I think we've probably, as Jess kind of mentioned, has all been in places where we've left the group feeling hopeless, or someone said something that's maybe left us with this feeling that it's never going to get better. And I think this is where that balance word comes in again. It's like, how can we sit with that but not get lost in it and not kind of inadvertently increase the hopelessness? How do we hold on to the belief that the person is strong, that they have a lot of courage and resilience, and that they will get through this? And I think for me, it comes back to that kind of wave and tsunami analogy, and not thinking about how someone's going to survive in 10 years, 5 years, 1 year, 6 months, but thinking about for the next 3 minutes, for the next chunk of time, how can you hold on? What do you need from us to help you do that? And how can we support each other to hold on? So there's something that's worked in the prison groups quite well, and it's took me a while to kind of feel comfortable with that. And I think the more comfortable I feel with it, the more comfortable group members are with it as well. It's a sort of strange mix. And I think I'm going to get to questions in a minute, because we've got we've got a raised hand. I've never had a raised hand before. That's quite exciting. Don't even know what that is. So I'm just going to have a little look. Oh, Ursula is raising her hand. Hello, Ursula. If you're able to, if you could like type and tell me what it is that you're raising your hand for, because that might mean that you've got a question or something. So I'll keep an eye on the chat threads. Cool. So I guess where I'm going with this is, if you are a facilitator, you're probably like John sort of mentioned, that he's once created that role of Bob, and very sensibly and awesomely actually recognised that it was unhelpful. It was, at some point you're going to be hearing some of this and going, oh no, I do that all the time, or I'm going to do that. And you might get so hyper vigilant about your own role as a facilitator that you're just like really, really freaked out by it and never say anything because you're so scared of saying the wrong thing. And that's the danger of really focusing and reflecting on something. It's that it doesn't seem to kind of enable you to really kind of be yourself, because you feel you have to be perfect. At least that's how I can feel sometimes. And I guess what I'd like to say is that I think actually imperfection is the goal. It's really important to be imperfect as a facilitator. It's important to be imperfect as a facilitator simply because if we're perfect all of the time, how does the group grow, change? How does the group learn to support each other? How do they learn to listen and be alongside each other in their distress? Because we're always the ones doing it. We're perfect. We always say the right things in an imaginary world. And how do we ever leave space for the group to take ownership of itself? Imagine we were abducted by aliens, not that we will be, or randomly have to leave the group. Has the group got the resilience to kind of, does the group believe actually that it has the resilience to kind of continue without us? And I think it's necessary sometimes that we might go through appearing essential to the group, but in the long term, that can be a problem. And I've seen many, many groups that are fantastic never get a group member come up to be a facilitator because the facilitator is just too good. and it can actually inhibit the group slightly. I think it's, with that in mind, how do we turn sort of crises into something that can be useful? And I think this is by actually saying, hands up, I made a mistake. I've got this feeling that I've just said something a bit out of whack. Or going, I'm not sure what to say to that. You know, I'm listening, but that sounds really overwhelming. Being honest about your feelings sometimes, and just being a human in the room rather than a robot facilitator of doom. I like the idea of Homer Simpson's crisis unities. You know, actually, a crisis is both a danger and an opportunity, and that's really awesome. That if as a group we can sit down and talk about, okay, what did I do? I feel like I messed that up, and I have messed up many things as a facilitator. what is it? What was your experience of that? What did you need from me as a facilitator? And how could you help me if that happens again? An example of this would be a crisis where, say, there's an argument or something that maybe triggers a lot of my kind of conflict resolution issues, and I don't handle it well. Going back to the group and going, what happened there? I feel like we're starting to get into this really strange place. How can we not do that? And asking people's support when stuff like that happens. So it's not that people expect you to always be the one who has everything. And that can enable people to start to feel this is our group together. We're all responsible for it. Now, I'm going to move on to the question and answers because we've got a nice load of stuff here. So I don't know if you guys can see the questions. So I'm going to read them out and then try and sort of reflect on a few answers. Obviously, feel free to email me at rachel@behindthelabel.co.uk if there's any issues. And also for Ursula, I know you raised your hand before and I haven't been able to see you in the chat feed. So if there's something that kind of hasn't worked for you technologically, that's okay. Just let me know and we'll sort that out for next time. Joel asked, is it better for a voice hearer to facilitate a group? Oh, that's a hot button, isn't it? We should have just done a whole session on that. For me, the answer would be, it depends. I think for me, being a facilitator is the important thing. Can you balance all the things we've been talking about? Are you a good people person? Are you open-minded? Can you help people create this space? Whether you're a voice hearer or not, that makes you a good facilitator. But if you can do that and be a voice hearer as well, or have past experience of voices, then that's like a cherry on the cake. It really helps. But if you're a voice hearer that believes that your experiences are the same as everyone's and that your experiences are paramount and are very rigid in the way that you see stuff, or a non-voice hearer that's very rigid in the way they see something, you're not going to be a great facilitator. So I think it's more about your ability as a facilitator rather than whether you're a voice hearer or not. So non-voice hearers, don't worry, you can still be awesome. Another question from Jenna. I share my personal experiences as a voice hearer, vision seer and other unusual perceptions. I hope I'm not contaminating my role as a facilitator. I feel like I'm a member of the group, not just a facilitator, without dominating the conversation. Is that okay? Yes, I think that's wonderful actually. As some other people said on the chat feed, it's cool if you can actually say to the group, what is it like for you guys having someone as a facilitator who also shares, if the group feels safe enough to have that conversation. But if they have issues with that, I'd suggest exploring why that's difficult and whether it should be or not. Not should, that's a bad word, but what that's about. And I think it's an ideal that you can share without contaminating. It sounds like you're getting a good balance there. And I think you're right. I'm there for the members of the group, though, through shared experiences, and it seems to bring us all in unity through shared understanding. The members seem to be very comfortable, empathising, leaving them as they are the experts. I'm new as a facilitator. What are your thoughts? And I think from what you said, that sounds like a really good way of handling it. I think the being us in the room rather than just being me as the good one, you guys as the messed up ones. Yeah, it sounds like you've really managed to challenge that. Cool. How do you manage when you have one group member who has an experience and an explanation for their experiences very different from anything you've ever come across before, and neither you or the other group members understand it and aren't sure how to respond? This can be difficult, especially if someone's communicating in a way that you just don't get, so you're struggling to make out words, or it just seems very far out of your comfort zone. I guess the way I've kind of handled that is to be really honest and go, I've never experienced that and I don't know much about it. Could you explain a bit more, maybe teach it? And what's that like for you? It's a bit like, imagine someone comes from a country that you've never been to, the other side of the world that has a very different culture, a different set of rules, expectations, and you're welcoming this person into a space, but you don't know whether you might accidentally say the wrong thing because you don't know what that culture is. How do we handle that? We go, I don't know what the useful thing to say or do is, and I wonder if you'd be as kind enough to actually share your experiences with me so that I can really be useful. And kind of say, if I say the wrong thing that's disrespectful, tell me, because yeah, and tell group members, because this is interesting, but it's new. And I think that's it. The curiosity, rather than feeling the need that we need to know everything, is the key for me as a facilitator. And the final question from Jenna, zipping through them to be just before the end. We have a support group member who speaks of death and not sure of his future. How would you respond to him? I share that I hear how difficult and scared as well as painful he must feel, checking out if I understand his feelings. I think that sounds really good to me. I think definitely checking out his feelings. And I've certainly worked with people, supported people who are very concerned about the future and whether they'll have one. And I guess I tend to go with the feelings as well. So what's that like for you? How is that to share that here? And how do you manage that? Generally spend more talking about the feelings and the management, but eventually, yeah, how do you deal with that on a day-to-day front? And I think what I like about what you've done there is it seems like you've resisted the urge to go, but you're not going to die. I think kind of maybe looking at how long that's been going on can be useful, because it's that sense of distance and time. But I like that you've restrained the urge to go, yeah, but you're not going to die, are you? Because actually that's the least important part here. The point is that it sounds a really overwhelming experience, and it might well be one that other people can respond to. And I think that might be a subject for one of my next webinar things, actually, is about dealing with those real difficult subjects that are very emotive for everyone. I think fear of death and loss is one of those subjects that can be very tricky within a group. If you've got people that have lost people as well, that can produce quite a lot of contradictory feelings in people at different times. Okay, so we've just reached the end of the webinar. I really want to thank you guys for coming. For logging on and being part of this. I'm really glad that people have taken part in the chat and started to interact a little bit. That's fantastic. For those of you that have struggled to hear this, or there's been technical issues, do email me and we'll sort that out, give you kind of a copy of it or something like that. It'd be great to get your feedback. If you want to email me, say hi, stuff like that would be good. And what I will do is email you all a little kind of handout that I've got about sustaining groups and dealing with some common challenges, just in case it's useful. So probably expect that tomorrow. So thanks so much for your time and for being the first people I've ever done a webinar with. That's kind of awesome. We'll be extending this and probably getting more interactive features as I work out how to do it. And I hope you'll maybe come back sometime in the future. Okay, have a lovely Saturday and see you soon. Bye-bye.